Welcome to Casual Politics. Jacob Rees Mogg. Thank you very much for accepting my request, and I'm very grateful to you.
It's a pleasure.
You've been member. This is your second time that you give your time to us, and I'm very grateful to you. You've been member of Parliament since 2010.
That's right.
So, and before as well, you were involved with the Conservative Party. And so now, first of all, because over the past 3 days, the MPs' access for cash row has been actually in the all over the papers. So
Yes.
my first question is that first, do you think that Sir Malcolm Rifkin and Jack Straw have done anything wrong, in your opinion?
Well, I don't know that the dispatches programme and the reports in the Telegraph certainly were damaging, and that's why they have both referred themselves to the Standards Commission, and Sir Malcolm has decided to stand down in the next election, that Jack Straw was already intending to do so. And the report, the inquiry will take place, and it will be established whether what they did was within or outside the rules. In a sense, that isn't really the point at issue. There are two separate points. One is that politicians must always look beyond the detail of the rules, that even if you're within the rules, the impression you create is important. But the second thing I'd say is that these two people have been public servants for 40 years. Sir Malcolm Rifkin was a minister from 1979 all the way through to 1997. They've done a great deal for the service of their country in their political careers, and there must be a certain sadness and human sympathy that people who have done very distinguished service should see the end of their careers have a scandal around it.
Do you think that it was sad for him that he ends more than 45 years of public service, more than only 48 hours?
It is a sadness. I mean, that there is a pressure when stories of this kind come out, and it needs to be resolved quickly, so I think he did the right thing. But it's certainly sad that this has been what has happened.
And are you in favour of secondary jobs?
Oh yes, very much so. I think it's very important. That
So
that's
did you
one.
vote for the government's bill last night?
I supported the government last night. The Labour motion was idiotic, that it simply focused on directorships and consultancies. It would not have stopped somebody actually having a full-time paid job. It didn't focus on employment. It was an ill-thought-through motion by the Labour Party dealing with an immediate knee-jerk reaction to a political problem. In terms of outside interests, MPs ought to have outside interests to keep them informed with what is going on in the world at large.
And some people,
Thank you.
and some people they say that we need expertise in the House of Commons, and some people argue that this is up to the House of Lords to have expertise and not to the House of Commons. Do you agree with that?
No, of course both houses should have expertise and should have people who understand the subjects that they are discussing. Both houses need that. There's not a monopoly on wisdom in the House of Lords. But you don't want a purely professional political class who rule us from Westminster. You want people who become politicians, MPs, for 5 years or for 10 years, and they go back into the business they were doing before. That it is only a job for a specified term. It is not a job for life, and I think it's important to understand that. Otherwise, you simply have professional politicians.
And do you think that we should draw a line between secondary jobs and you're in favour and lobbying jobs?
Oh, undoubtedly. I think members of Parliament carrying on with business interests that they had before they got elected is a perfectly reasonable thing to do. The farmer, the author, the journalist, the doctor, the barrister, investment manager in my case. I think people who get into Parliament and use being a member of Parliament to become a lobbyist are crossing a line, and that's a line that they should not cross.
And do you think that what happened, it just reinforced skepticism of people towards the establishment?
Yes.
And do you think, are there any solutions to deal with it? What are the solutions that the government actually proposed? Because back in 2009, David Cameron said that once he becomes the Prime Minister, he would he will just deal with it, but after 5 years still he had done nothing.
Well, that's not quite fair. A bill on lobbying has been passed through Parliament. There will be a register of lobbyists, so something has been done. It's very difficult to stop lobbying because a lot of lobbying is perfectly legitimate. That any of my constituents have the right to turn up at the central lobby and ask to see me to tell me their views, and that is lobbying. That's the purest form of lobbying. You might have a view that you wish to share with me, and that again is perfectly legitimate lobbying. The difficulty comes with paid lobbying where the payment goes to the Member of Parliament. It would not be unreasonable for you to be employed to lobby me. It would be unreasonable for me to be paid to accept the lobbying. That's where the line comes, and I think it's a pretty clear line.
So why didn't Conservatives, they didn't vote for Zach Goldsmith's bill?
Well, I did. I completely supported Zach Goldsmith. I thought he was
But why
right.
did the government did it?
It was a free vote.
Yes. But still, actually, most of them, they voted against Zach Goldsmith. If his bill passed through the House, we wouldn't have any problems now.
Well, I don't think that's true. His bill was about the recall of members of Parliament, or his amendment to a government bill. It wasn't specifically about lobbying. And some members of the government voted for it, some members voted against it. It was
But it would trigger a by-election.
It wouldn't automatically.
Yes.
These circumstances may well not have led to a by-election. It would have required a recall process to be gone through if Zach Goldsmith's bill had been passed and the people in the respective constituencies had decided to start the recall process. I don't think recall was really a means of dealing with this. I think it was a very good way of looking at the broader issues of the accountability of members of Parliament between elections.
And now, concerning government's engagement with younger voters, do you think that government has been successful with it so far?
Well, it's not for government to engage with younger voters, it's for the political parties to engage with younger voters, to persuade them to vote for their manifestos at general elections. So it's a party issue rather than a governmental issue. Though parties, when in government, obviously have an interest in doing things that younger voters are.
With increasing tuition fees, it would not increase the engagement.
That doesn't follow at all. The increasing tuition fees may make younger people engage with politics more because they don't like tuition fees, and therefore if they voted for another political party they may find tuition fees were reduced, or if they voted for the Greens, probably abolished. So I don't think it's right to say that tuition fees per se change political engagement. Though I think there is a problem that young people are not sufficiently engaged, and that is a challenge for politicians to say and do things that make younger people interested in political affairs.
And do you think that, the government, because government with putting actually new policies, introducing new policies, could actually engage more with the students? For example, now they said that in your manifesto, party manifesto, you got compulsory jobs, volunteering, that it's compulsory for younger people, and it's compulsory. So do you think that with putting more pressures on those at the bottom and lift pressures on those at the top, I talk about pensioners, do you think that you're going to engage more with younger voters?
Well, there's not going to be a policy of compulsory volunteering for all young people. We're not bringing back national service or doing anything of that kind. Greater opportunities for volunteering are being created, and there's the National Citizen Service Programme, which is, I think, a very healthy thing. But there's no prospect of going back to national service.
But those younger people that they got mental health problems, so what should we do to deal with it?
Some people, regardless of age, have mental health problems, and actually a Lib Dem minister in the Department for Health is doing very good work in improving the mental health services that are available, and that's work that I think is of crucial importance. That there is certainly an argument that mental health services have been the poor relation of the broader health service in recent years, and that ought to change because we do have real problems as a nation with mental health issues. But that's for young and old people.
And a while ago, George Osborne announced his plans for pension bonds. That obviously was a boost for pensioners. So do you think that is it only for the votes that the government is because they already have got money? So
No, I think it's actually about fairness. That since the financial crisis, borrowers have been very favourably treated. They've seen interest rates collapse, and that has helped them to manage to service their borrowings for an extended period, which they might otherwise have found difficult, if not impossible. On the other hand, savers have been severely penalised because interest rates have been so low. And for people on a fixed income, this has been extremely difficult. And so this is just to provide a little bit of fairness for pensioners.
but you talk about fairness. Don't you think that it's more fair if we help those at the bottom than those at the top?
Well, some of the greatest poverty in the country is with pensioners, and they have very limited incomes, and the marginal increase in incomes through giving them some better savings opportunities is actually a very helpful thing to do.
So it's partly it's for the votes as well.
I don't think it is. I don't think it's a propagandist move. I think it is a genuinely thought-through move to help people who have had to make considerable sacrifices. It's the people dependent on the income from their savings have since 2009 found that their savings income has been very low indeed. So it's just to give them a little bit of help and to provide some funding for the government. They could get slightly cheaper funding through the markets.
In 1964, Conservatives, they achieved 40% of votes in, I think it was northeast.
They do indeed, yes, you're quite
And
right.
and nowadays, they're too far for achieving that goal. So what went wrong in your opinion?
It's a very interesting and important question. Why does conservatism not get that share of the vote in areas where it did very well up until the 1960s? I think there are a number of reasons. I think some of them are industrial, long-term industrial issues, and the unemployment in the northeast that came about because of some of the industries failing in the 1970s and 1980s, and that these are long-term issues. But I think there's also a problem that elections are inevitably fought in the margins, and the safe seats in either direction get ignored, and that therefore the effort in the northeast by the Conservatives and by Labour in the southeast has reduced, and I think we should make more of an effort. And it's very interesting what's happening to UKIP, because if you take what I would call the Conservative family, UKIP is doing very well in the northeast. There is certainly an appetite for a Conservative message in the northeast, even if not an appetite currently for the Conservative Party. And we need to work on that. We need to see how we can make that appetite for conservatism something that benefits the Conservatives.
And do you still foresee a pact between your party and UKIP after the general election?
No, not after the general election, because UKIP won't have enough seats. So it will be of academic interest. I see no prospect of a pact with UKIP in the short term.
And do you think that the referendum should take place earlier than expected in 2016?
No, I don't. I think that would be a mistake. That if there is to be a renegotiation, it needs time. It will be a very complex, detailed renegotiation. If we rush it, we will not get anything out of renegotiation. And I don't want the status quo in Europe. I want it to be changed. I either want a good renegotiation, the removal of free movement of people and so on, or I want us to leave. What I don't want is to have a choice of either full steam ahead with the EU or out. I think that would be a bad choice to give the British electorate.
And Jacob Rees Mogg, for a long time you advocated for zero contract hours. Do you think are they about fairness and justice?
Yes, I think zero contract hours are a very good way of starting some people in employment. I think there are issues relating to exclusive zero hours contracts which I think are unfair, but as an ordinary basis they are perfectly reasonable and they allow flexibility for employees and employers alike. They get people started in employment who may have been unemployed, and they actually maintain employment. If employers have flexibility, they don't need to make people redundant. They can keep them on their books. And then when orders pick up, they can offer more hours to people. And that flexibility is one of the key reasons why unemployment in this country has risen much less than would have been expected through the recession. And in fact, since 2010 has declined very sharply. That is to do with having a flexible labour market, and 0 hours contracts are part of that.
But it doesn't give any security to individuals.
Security is a false security. If you look at the continent, they tell people that their jobs are very secure, but they're not, because they don't have any jobs.
And ruling out that aspect of employment, do you think that people since 2010, families have become better off or worse off?
Well, there was an enormous crash in 2008-9, which led to a very sharp decline in living standards. And that was because of the irresponsible spending of the last Labour government and their incompetent management of the economy. Since 2010, things have begun to stabilise and living standards are once again beginning to recover. But that's
They're still very low at the moment.
They are recovering. But that's been a long-term process to deal with the failures of the last Labour government. But it would be idle to pretend that living standards have been rising rapidly in the last 5 years. They have not been.
But it hasn't translated into people's pocket.
Well, wages are beginning to rise faster than inflation. But you have to remember that there was this enormous economic crash, and that was the fault of the last Labour government. So what the Conservatives have been doing is clearing up the problems left behind by the Labour Party. And that has taken time. And of course it was always going to take time.
But as you say, the economy is recovering, and then wages are growing faster than inflation. So why then your party is not leading the polls then?
Well, that's a different matter. Things are improving, and that's extraordinarily good news. People's standard of living is beginning to rise again. The recovery has taken a solid hold. What the opinion polls say is not always an immediate reflection of what is happening in the economy, that it's not as simple as that. Although economics are very important electorally, people don't necessarily always vote purely for economic reasons, so there are other factors. And we shall see on the 7th of May whether the opinion polls have got it right or not.
And the other factors are immigration. Do you think that the government failed to reduce immigration to tens of thousands?
The government has failed to meet that target, and the reason for that
so probably
is...
that's why that you're not leading the polls then. One of the reasons.
I doubt that. I think that's a simplistic analysis, actually. I think that immigration is an important issue, but the government has made efforts to control it. The reason it's got out of control is EU immigration, and we can only deal with EU immigration if we have a proper renegotiation or leave the European Union. And that's, I think, what we must do. We must make it a clear part of the renegotiations that we want control of our own borders. And if the EU won't let us have that, then we must leave.
But if you leave the EU, don't you think that UK will become isolated from the real world?
Well, no, I don't. I don't think that being a member of the EU is necessarily bringing you into the real world. Actually, I think it will give us the opportunity to look to a broader world. That the European Union is an area of low economic growth, of bureaucratic rather than democratic politics, of a lack of engagement with the outside world, whereas the United Kingdom has always looked to the broader horizons. So I think it would free us up to do that again, rather than being tied into a pretty sclerotic continental system.
In your opinion, are people anti-Brussels or anti-European?
Oh, definitely anti-Brussels and pro-European. People admire European culture and their travels to the continent.
So then UK should remain within the EU then?
No, the European Union is not Europe. The European Union is a bureaucratic structure.
But it unites
No, it doesn't
European
unite you. It divides as much as anything. Ask Greeks what they think of the Germans. And the hostility that is created by the European Union between those two nations is extreme. The European Union has never really united anybody. It is a bureaucratic organisation that imposes rules from on high upon populations and ignores elections, overrules elections. It's a pretty disgraceful organisation, actually.
And now Scotland, do you think that government proposals on English MPs on English roads, are they sham?
No, they're not a sham, but it is an extremely complex issue that England is 85% of the United Kingdom, and therefore it is very difficult to have a system that gives parity to England with Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, because England is too big. On the other hand, if the other nations that make up the United Kingdom have a lot of powers reserved to those individual countries, something needs to be done to even it up for England. It's a question of what that something is. Do I think the government's got all the answers yet? No, I don't. Do I think there is an answer? Possibly, but not certainly. It may be one of those political problems to which there is not an answer, and then we have to deal with the inconsistency.
And do you think that in May 7th, SNP will win many seats?
Well, that's what the opinion polls are currently saying. It'll be interesting to see how the campaign goes and whether that changes between now and the 7th of May. But if you take a straight reading of the opinion polls, the SNP will win lots of seats. But there's a campaign to go through first, so that may not happen.
And do you think that David Cameron is running scared to not participate in those TV debates?
No, not at all. He said he'd be happy to participate in the debates under the right circumstances. I think the broadcasters have bungled it all ways round. First of all, it was their initial proposals were too narrow in who they included, and then they became too broad, but still excluded the Democratic Unionists. Then they couldn't work out what to do with Mr Clegg in the final round, so they've upset the Lib Dems as well. I think the broadcasters have been rather arrogant in their approach to the debates and have found that they have come up with a system that almost nobody likes.
But it's up to an independent body to decide whether the Prime Minister could participate in those TV debates and not to the political class to decide. Do you agree with that?
Well, it's up to an agreement that you can't make people appear in a debate if they don't want to, and the debate has to be fair to all the political parties. Excluding the Democratic Unionists is ridiculous. That UKIP and the Conservatives stand in Northern Ireland, and so if you're including Plaid Cymru and you're including the Scottish Nationalists, excluding the DUP is a really silly thing for broadcasters to do.
And as Ashcroft polls show, it's unlikely that Conservatives get re-elected with a majority. So would you like to see another coalition government with Lib Dems?
No, I would not. One's enough. I have a lot of respect for many of the Lib Dems, some of whom have turned out to be very good ministers. But I don't think another coalition would be the right thing to do. The first coalition came about in the teeth of an enormous financial crisis, and both party leaders put the national interest ahead of party interest. We are not now facing this type of financial crisis, and therefore I think a minority government is a perfectly realistic prospect.
And my last question, what will you do after the general election?
What will I do after the general election? Well, we'll see what the result is, which will probably depend on what I do.
Jacob Rees Mogg, thank you very much.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you. Right.